introduce Rav Yochanan Zweig, Shlita, who's fondly known as Rav Yochanan. I go back with Rav Yochanan a long time. My brother goes back even longer, back to the Baltimore days. I go back to the Yerushalayim days. Just to say a few words, very, not even touching the tip of the iceberg. Here's an American-born Rosh Hashiva, a Gaon, reminiscent to the Gaonist of Shlita there was a century ago. An original thinker, a Lamdan, who looks at a piece of Gemara with a whole different perspective. Interpretations that maybe you and I would never come up with. As a Magid Shir, a tremendous koch has borrowed. The pasuk says in Mishlei, "La'adam marchei leiv, u'mei Hashem mana loshon." They always like to interpret it that man comes forward with his emotional energy. But only then, with that feeling in his heart, does HaKadosh Baruch Hu grant him the capacity, the eloquency to formulate words and sentences and paragraphs and communicate Torah to the masses. Rav Yochanan forces us to use our minds, to analyze, to ask questions. In the Jewish community, learn to ask a question properly. As a mechanic, an individual who speaks to our generation. The Gemara says in the second kindness that Choni Amado that slept for 70 years. When he woke up, he overheard the learning of the Beis Medrash. He tried to identify himself as Choni Amado, nobody recognized him. And he refused to admit that that was him, that he was the man. And the Mepharshim will ask the question, if in the Beis Medrash they were learning the Torah of Choni Amado, why couldn't he just come into the Beis Medrash, answer all their questions, stump them with other questions? And the answer that the Mepharshim give is that a Talmud can only learn from his Rebbe, who teaches him in that language, with those words. Yiftach b'doro kishmul b'doro. Rabbi Zweig is an individual who's been blessed with the ability to share Torah with our generation. An individual has brought Torah on such a high level to Miami Beach, Florida, who would have believed it years ago. I want to thank Rabbi Aaron Poston for organizing this evening. And Mr. Shem, Rabbi Poston will close tonight with some remarks. And without further ado, Rosh.
Say one thing, I know Zari for 45 years. I know when I was going to introduce him, as I know him, the person, Makish Emes, only looking for the truth, nothing fancy, just pursuit of truth. But tonight he did exactly. Actually, his brother and I went to Yeshiva. His brother came after me in Yeshiva. You go back, that's something like 1957. 1957? And it's a great schus that you have Rosh Koilel, stature, really a sophisticated Talmid Chacham, really is searching for truth. It's not about him, it's about truth. That's a very refreshing, it's almost a breath of fresh air today. I also would like to recognize my good friend Warren. Most people who make Aliyah, which I think is a very proper reason to go, and it's because they're looking what I can get from Eretz Yisrael. What will I be able to receive? That's a legitimate purpose if all you're doing in Chutz La'aretz is receiving. But if in Chutz La'aretz you're instrumental in building and developing Torah, then to go to a place where you're going to receive is a huge downgrade. A person has to have responsibility to build this. If you're not capable, then you're a receiver. But if you're capable, then you have to be a builder. And the question is, you don't know Warren, but Warren actually changed the face of Thornhill, which is a very vibrant, it's really about Shuvah community, a very serious people committed to learning and committed to Yiddishkeit. It was a very not learned community for the most part. Warren brought the Kollel there, and he really changed the whole caliber of the community's involvement with serious Torah study. It's really unbelievable now what the community has been transformed. Therefore, I have to believe that Warren only came here to do more, not to do less. Because we only come here to be a recipient, to be usher for to make Aliyah. We're not allowed to come to Israel and do less than we're doing in Chutzlaretz. And those of them, they know him very well, and I assure you that he will make a huge difference here. And as we know that we think that there's nothing more to do in Yerushalayim, probably more to do here than any other place. There's more potential here, but there's more to do also. So it's my bracha that you use the same energy and foresight and vision that you did to change the community in Thornhill. Moses Hashem will do exactly the same. I hope this is the beginning of that in Yerushalayim HaKodesh.
Amen.
I'd like to begin with a well-known Gemara, and I guess part of the problem we learn on Tisha B'Av. Nobody's really, maybe you're not even supposed to be learning on Tisha B'Av in a way that you get really an academic understanding of what the Talmud is really saying. It's probably even permissible on Tisha B'Av, but to get some insight into what the Churban is all about. And it's a well-known story. I'll just say over the general gist, and then we'll read the text inside. There's many, many serious textual problems, contradictions, internal contradictions, contradictions from other places, and hopefully we'll get some idea what our current problem is, because we're still in Golis, 2,000 years and counting, and maybe some solutions too. The story was there was a host we will call Mr. X, the host. Can you hear me in the back?
Not so well.
Mr. X was a host. He was hosting a party. Mr. X's best friend was Kamsa. His person he didn't get along with, he was feuding Hatfields and McCoy, was Bar Kamsa. And he sent a messenger to deliver, as they used to do, a sophisticated society, aristocratic society, sent, a hand-delivered invitation. And he sent a messenger, and the messenger, by mistake, Mr. X's party invited Bar Kamsa, his enemy of X, as opposed to his best friend, a very good friend, Kamsa. Comes to the party, and what are you doing here? I was invited. No, there was a mistake. Get out. Finally picks him up. First he says, you know what, let me stay, I'll pay for my food, drink. No, out. I'll pay for half the party. No, I'll pay for the whole party. No, he picks him up and evicts him. The rabbis are watching this happen, and they don't say anything. And Bar Kamsa becomes very incensed that the rabbis did not react to this public humiliation. And he decides that he will cause problems for the Jewish community. He went to Caesar and says the Jews are contemplating rebellion. How do you know that? Offer them a sacrifice. You see, they won't bring the sacrifice. The general rule is that if a Gentile offers a sacrifice, it can be sacrificed in the temple. You see, they won't take yours. And he gave a beautiful animal, and he made a blemish in the animal that under Noahide law is not considered a blemish, under Jewish law was, and therefore they couldn't accept it. There's some discussion what they should do. Should they kill Bar Kamsa? Should they sacrifice it anyway? And finally, Talmud says, no, we can't do that. So Bar Kamsa went back and reported to the emperor, the Jews are rebelling, and that's when the city of Jerusalem was destroyed. That's Al Kamsu Bar Kamsa Nechar of Yerushalayim. So I guess the first obvious question there is, why did the rabbis not respond? Public humiliation, I think the only sin, there's many sins in the Torah, not many, but there's three major sins and derivatives of those sins that you have to allow yourself to be killed for. Idolatry, adultery, murder. A person has to allow himself to be killed rather than you put a gun to my head, you kill him or I'll kill you. I have to allow myself to be killed. Do idolatry or I'll kill you. You have to let yourself be killed. And there's branches of that sin. But those three sins. But there's no sin, I don't believe, that you have to kill yourself for rather than do the sin. Other than the Mishnah says, you should affirmatively jump into a burning hot oven and kill yourself rather than publicly humiliate somebody. I think it's the only sin. Others, a person has to allow himself to be killed, but to kill yourself, there's no obligation other than public humiliation. So it's a very, what do you mean the rabbis are sitting there and doing nothing? How did they do that? HaRav deals with it, but he really doesn't have an adequate answer. It's a very compelling question. Another question is, the introduction to this story, the Talmud brings a sentence. And the sentence is, Ashrei Adam Mefache Tomen. A person should always be in fear. And Rashi explains fear means a person should be aware of the consequences of his actions. He should be roas hanola. Ezu chacham roas hanola. The Gemara says in Talmud. Someone who sees the future. I mean, sees the consequences of his actions. And therefore, they didn't see the consequences. The rabbis, the host didn't see the consequences of the actions. That's the introduction to this story. And next there's two other stories, two other cities, and Rashi says the reason this is introduced because the problem was they didn't realize what could happen from that. First of all, Jews are not generally accused of being stupid. This is like they're stupid. That's what the temple was destroyed for, because they were stupid. They didn't see the consequences of their action. How intelligent, for crying out loud, do you have to be that if you do something, the next two stories, Jews killed a platoon of Roman soldiers. The third story was the honor guard or the personal guard of the princess, the emperor's daughter, they killed. What do they think was going to happen? They thought Rome was doing nothing. What does that mean? It doesn't make any sense. And what do you think is going to happen? I guess here you could think they didn't think Bar Kamsa would become so vindictive. But there's three stories. And besides, is that really the sin? We're too stupid? We don't look at consequences of actions? I think it's a very serious question. I've never seen anybody ask that question, but to me, that's probably the most compelling of all the questions. The Talmud introduces the destruction of these three cities and gives us the whole story because they did not, Rashi's Raya Sanola, they did not view what the possible consequences of their actions were. And certainly, you remember what they did to Hydra? When Hydra was assassinated, I mean, Hitler, maybe you don't think Rome is Hitler, but I don't know that they would be much less. I mean, there was a huge, he was assassinated, Hitler just started slaughtering indiscriminately. What do they think? They're killing a platoon who's there on an official business, and they thought they would do nothing? Who are we talking about? By the way, these are Jews who know what the Roman armies are capable of doing. So what are we being accused of? We're not afraid. We're not looking at consequences. Something with our intelligence. And then when the Talmud says, who's culpable here? Al Kamsu Bar Kamsa. Kamsu Bar Kamsa? How do we hold Kamsa responsible here? Kamsa never came to the party. Kamsa didn't come to the party. Bar Kamsa made the problem. What do you know, Kamsu Bar Kamsa? And besides, shouldn't the host be the one with the greatest degree of culpability? Because someone's at your party, he's offering you, which itself becomes a problem in itself. Probably the greatest pleasure you can have of taking an enemy, the greatest victory is you can make him pay for your symphony. He offered to pay for the whole symphony. He doesn't have any enemies. But if somebody would have been a greater pleasure, he should pay for the whole bar mitzvah. There's a vindictiveness that gives you great pleasure. How come Bar Kamsa didn't take the taste of revenge? The man offered on his own. many other questions. Those are, I think, the most compelling questions. Why is the host not held culpable? Why is Kamsa held culpable? Why actually didn't the rabbis react? And how does this do with the fact because they didn't look at the consequences of their actions? What the rabbi, what did Chazal telling us? And what are we supposed to learn from it? Be more intelligent? What are we supposed to be learning from that, if that's what it is? And of course, the main question that the Talmud tells us in Yuma, the destruction of the second temple was because of Sinas Chinam. Because we didn't get along with each other. That we already know. I don't have to explain what that is, right? Sinas Chinam. Pick up the newspapers, no problem. Daily paper, you have new story every day, probably every hour. The Talmud said, Kamsu bar Kamsa, they weren't afraid of consequences. How do we reconcile that with the well-established dictum in the Gemara Yuma that the second temple was destroyed because of Sinas Chinam? In order to understand that, I'd like to read the text inside. Everybody knows the story. But you know, Talmud is not a history book. It's a study. It's Torah. And therefore, the way the story is written is actually to give us not just an account, but the rabbi's interpretation. When we study the story, we're learning Torah. If you find the same story in Josephus, that's a historical account. Here we're learning Torah, and every word in the story has to be analyzed the way the rabbis are writing the story. The story goes like this. The city of Jerusalem was destroyed because of Kamsa bar Kamsa. Man, his best friend was Kamsa, his enemy was bar Kamsa. He made a party. He said to his servant, bring me Kamsa, and he went and brought bar Kamsa. The man, host, comes down to the party, and he sees that bar Kamsa sitting there. And this is now the language of the Talmud. The way it's generally, what are you doing here? I didn't invite you. Amrle. This is the host talking to this uninvited guest who doesn't realize he's uninvited. Michti, let's see. Ahu Gavra, this man, Ahu Gavra, he's talking to him about him in the third person. Bar de Bove is the enemy of Ahu Gavra talking about himself. What kind of stultified language is that? The Talmud. I couldn't start. What are you doing here? Please get out. No, that's not what the Talmud says. Mirti, let's see. What do you mean, let's see? Well, this requires an now. When you see your enemy, you don't have to say, let's see. And secondly, what he should say to him, what are you doing over here? Get out! You know I can't stand you. Let's see. This man, that man, is an enemy of that man. That man is saying him, you're my enemy. That man is an enemy of that man talking about himself. These are words of Torah. And if the words of Torah, every word has to be understood. We're learning a piece of Torah now. Like you learn a pasuk in Chumash, it's Torah, Torah Shabbat Peh, written down in the Talmud, it's Torah. What do these words mean? The words don't resonate, and it's such an awkward way for the rabbis to say what could have been said very easily. What are you doing here? The chat's like this. A man offers you, who's your enemy, he offers you to pay for your whole party. That's a huge gift, and you're getting the joy of your enemy is paying for it. He's not going to do anything, he's just going to sit quietly on the side, but he won't have the public humiliation of going out. Why don't you take the money? Why should somebody not take the money? What does he get out of? What pleasure, what perverse pleasure does he have? What perverse pleasure does he have in doing this, embarrassing him rather than getting the money? What is that telling us about the nature of the person that's doing this? But I think the definition of sinas chinam is when, in fact, the word sinas chinam, does that make any sense? I hate you for no reason. Somebody who hates, the literal translation, I hate you for no reason, that's a person you should immediately give, you know, a free hour of being to visit a psychiatrist. Nobody hates for no reason. I hate you for a reason, but I don't, maybe my reaction, an overreaction to a hurt, or imagined hurt, but nobody hates for no reason. Sinas chinam means for no reason. How can anyone know what we're talking about in the Michigan here? Somebody who hates for no reason? That also doesn't sound true. What are the rabbis saying? Sinas chinam. Nobody seemingly would hate somebody for no reason at all. Doesn't mean for no reason. Of course there has to be a reason. But it means chinam means there's no benefit. For example, it means it's like this here. Let's talk, I'll give you a historical example. Hitler lost the Second World War because he got involved in Operation Barbarossa, which means he sent his trains, that should have been sent to the east in order that they should be able to supply the troops invading Russia. And instead of that, he goes ahead and sends the trains to the west to burn more Jews. That's a very poor decision. It's not in his interest. It's not in his interest. And that's the only reason, if he would have taken Stalingrad, there's no, everybody, and all the generals say, it's unbelievable how thin the thread was that we would have lost everything. I mean, we went to Russia, then the rest of Europe is gone, and the United States would have followed for sure. But what? He was so obsessed with killing Jews that he did something that was inimical to his self-interest. It didn't make sense. For his benefit, what would have been? Would have made more sense. Go ahead and supply your troops. And afterwards, if you get rid of the Russians, then you come back and take care of the Jews. There's already a whole infrastructure in place for the final solution. But he was so compulsive and obsessed with killing Jews that instead of doing that, which would make sense, he has now to keep us. It was a Russian winter. They'll get plenty of supplies. They'll be able to fight. And the answer was he didn't do that. That's sinas chinam. What does that sinas chinam? It means that he did something that the loss to him was greater than the benefit that he could have had. That it would have made more sense to him to kill, to supply the troops, and not have killed. But his hatred against the Jews was so great that no matter what his benefit, it did not overweigh the pain or whatever it was of getting rid of the Jews. Sinas chinam means he was doing something that made absolutely no, it wasn't to his interest. There was no self-interest over here. The opposite, the self-interest would have been supply the troops, execute the Jews later. But he was so obsessed with the extermination of the Jews that he was willing to jeopardize what he needed in order to kill Jews. Bar Kamsa is, the host is doing the same thing. Somebody is going to pay for his party. It doesn't make sense for him, but his hatred of Kamsa is so great, his hatred of Kamsa, and if Kamsa's sitting there, he doesn't have the pleasure of stepping on him, of putting him down, was outweighed when someone pays for a big suit, and he could have felt good about that. But he was so compulsive about his hatred for Bar Kamsa that no matter what it would gain to him, it wouldn't be worth it. I have a story, I'm telling you a true story. I'm actually a pretty significant benefactor of the yeshiva. How do I have to see it? My mother just died, my 93-year-old mother, and all the years I was the son that was closest to her. The last 2 years, I sent her up to the very nice facility in the Northeast where my brother lives, and he took care of her, and he changed her will, and now I'm cut out of the will. I'm cut out of the will. What should I do? So, as you know, he doesn't know what you do. I'm going to sue. That's what, the only reason I should. So I asked him, well, you know, suing out of state on a will, how much is it going to cost you? Check it out, $200,000. How much money did you leave? $100,000. And I could not convince him. I could not convince him to, if he wins, he loses $100,000. If he wins, he loses $100,000. Otherwise, he's out $200,000. If he wins, he loses. When you hate somebody, even though it's inimical to his interest, but he hates it, he can't stand that he should get $100,000 from his mother. I mean, there's psychological reasons in his mind His mother will then be vindicated, she loved him more, whatever the psychological issues are. But the definition was he was willing to spend $200,000, or for sure $100,000, that his brother shouldn't get $100,000, and it might cost him an additional $200,000. Doesn't make sense. That's what sinas chinam. It's senseless. It makes no sense at all. That's the question. Why does the person do that? What does the person do? I mean, I hate you, but I'm going to spend $100,000 to make sure that you don't get $100,000. I'm going to spend maybe $200,000, hoping that you won't get $100,000, or for sure I'm spending $100,000 to make sure you don't get $100,000. If I win, I'm spending $100,000. Why is that? Who does that person really hate? How can I hate a person enough that it's costing me more than the pain that I'm inflicting on him is $100,000? The pain that I am inflicting on myself is $200,000. How could it be that I hate him so much that I'm willing to inflict more pain on me? The answer is, who do I really hate?
Himself.
I hate myself. Sinas chinam means a person hates himself. Sinas chinam, when I'm the host here hates himself so much, he's so alienated from himself, this relationship troubles him so much, he's in so much pain, that even though he'll be able to inflict a huge benefit, but the pain that he feels from a bar kamsa is so great that that's greater than whatever he can inflict on bar kamsa. Now let's read. What I just said is exactly what the Talmud says. A person who hates himself is what? He's alienated from himself. Ahu gavra. He looks at himself, he's been alienated from himself, so the Talmud describes him, Nichti, Ahu gavra. We'll talk about him in a second. Bar de Bavi Dahu gavra. How does he call himself? That man. It's ludicrous. It means that a person who has sinas chinam is so alienated, so estranged from himself, that he's actually looks at himself as that person. It's not me. What are you doing? I can't stand you. There's no I. There's no I here, because the person is so alienated from himself that he's willing to inflict on himself more pain that somebody else shouldn't get a pleasure. That means he's really alienated from himself. He's a self-hating person. If he's not a self-hating person, he looks at himself as Ahu Gavra. He's not one with himself. He's alienated. He's separated from himself. And now we also understand the first thing. The person that's alienated himself, he doesn't think the way we do. When he sees somebody, he's not focused on him. He's alienated from himself. Let me see. Let's see. He has to catch his own attention even when he sees his enemy. Because he's not a person who's self-hating, feels himself alienated from himself. And therefore, even when he starts the conversation, let's see. Instead of saying, what are you doing here? Let's see, that person, because it's not about, there's no him. The self-hating person, there's no sense of him. That's the definition of a self-hating person. And therefore, the Talmud is beginning here with giving us a definition of what sinas chinam is. A self-hating person in sinas chinam really means you hate yourself. You're a self-hating Jew. The definition, people find some practical application still today. A self-hating Jew. Our images of self-hating Jew, we just think that's somebody who's totally irreligious, but we'll see that's not true at all. A self-hating Jew. And therefore the Talmud is saying that he was willing to absorb a tremendous loss in order to, because he doesn't care about himself. He doesn't feel himself. He doesn't feel his pain. He doesn't feel the loss of the $200,000. He's alienated from himself. A self-hating person has separated himself from his psyche, and therefore he doesn't feel the pain either. That's what those words are. Every word in the Talmud is describing exactly the pathology of what's going through his mind. He has to when he sees his enemy, he has to bring himself back. He has to bring himself into focus, mirti, And he has to also say, Hahu Gavri, even talking about himself, because he's out. Until he reminds himself, the me is going to be upset by this. That man inside of him is going to be upset, and therefore he wants to throw him out. This begins a tremendous answer to the Marshal. It's a very compelling question. Why are the rabbis sitting there and doing nothing? How do the rabbis see this travesty, a public humiliation of a person, and do nothing? I think we all have a certain instinct, intuitive, which is totally wrong. It's probably important in the synagogue. There's a tochach. There's a mitzvah in the Torah that we have to criticize somebody. What most of us think that means is, I'm God's sergeant of arms. He deputized everybody who comes and davens here. And if someone's talking, you have an official deputization from God. Shut him up. Tell him to be quiet. God's deputy. That's the instinct that a lot of people feel. You know, with a huge venom, vindictiveness, because God appointed him to be their marshal. I'm the marshal. What's it called? Sergeant of arms in the Listen to the way the Rambam describes the mitzvah of tochacha. He says the mitzvah of tochacha begins, I should go to a person and I should tell him that he is being chayta al atzmi. Not something, you're doing something wrong, you're hurting yourself. This is the Rambam. Take a look at Perry Zolman, Hilchos Days. He describes the definition of the mitzvah is not telling somebody you're not allowed to do something. You're hurting yourself. You understand? You're hurting yourself. Guys getting involved with something. You know what that's going to do to your family, to your children, the embarrassment. Instead of, it's usher, you're not allowed to do that, it's adultery. That's not what you give tochacha. The Rambam says you have to tell the person he's chote al atzmo. That's the way it has to begin. You're hurting yourself. Which means that the posture of tocheya, of the mitzvah of tochacha, and maybe this will be disappointing, is that I'm not God's deputy, I'm your friend. I am your friend. I'm coming here as a friend of yours. I care about you. And you know, you're hurting yourself. Which then, you understand, you go to a shul, you sit down and daven, and I'm sure it doesn't happen here, and you come on time because you're the guest, and 10 minutes later somebody's like, you're sitting in my seat. And you go to another, you're sitting in my seat. And then all of a sudden, maybe you start talking during davening. Shh, shh. That's not tochach at all. The opposite. If you want to be mochiach a person, first of all, you see strangers come, you need a sitter. Here's a chumash. You have a place to make kiddush today. Then afterwards, you know, I care about you. You came into shul. I see you're a stranger. I see you have a talent, but maybe you don't know, you don't have a sitter. Maybe you need a chumash. You're not sure where they are. Were you for kiddush? You're a stranger. I say that to you. Then, during Kriyas Torah, you shouldn't talk. At least you'll have some credibility. I care about you. Tochacha has to come out of position, I care about you. That's what the Rambam says. I'm your friend, and you are hurting yourself. It means the mochiach is not an agent of the Almighty. He's part of the society, and we care about each other, we're attached to each other, and therefore I am your friend, and you're hurting yourself. You know I care about you. And by the way, if anybody has ever done anything effective in criticizing a person, this is the only criticism that works. When you become holy, holier than thou, and you give messages that this is forbidden, usually it has the exact opposite reaction. The person starts a war, he escalates it. By the way, the Shalom says, the halacha, even if on something that doesn't help, I'm obligated to do tochach. I have to criticize somebody, even though I think it's very unlikely it's going to help. That's what machlokas and Rishonim. If I'm almost sure it's not going to help. Some say you still have to criticize. Comes along the Shalah and says, but what about if it's going to make it worse? Then there's no din tochach. If you come holier than thou and start criticizing somebody, I can guarantee you're going to make it worse. And pretty soon he's going to talk louder than he was talking before during davening, and do other disruptive things. Tochacha is not, I'm coming from the position looking down at you, I'm your equal, I'm your friend, maybe I'm even a little less than you, I'm trying to help you out, I care about you. That's what tochacha is. How are you mochiach a person who doesn't care about himself? The rabbis can't do anything. They can't do anything short term. The man is doing, they're all saying this, the man is self-destructive. The man is, someone is willing to pay for his whole party. The man is so alienated, maybe they even heard what he said. I guess we can assume that the Talmud writes it, that the assembled guests maybe didn't hear the words, but the body language gave us, that's it, the host is, he's out of control. He's totally alienated from himself. Okay, what are we supposed to do? You're not allowed to, it's going to he'll make it louder. He'll start screaming in case there's somebody in the other room who didn't even hear about it. He'll scream. Or maybe he'll follow him out in the street and keep on. The only way you ever criticize a person is by telling him you care about him. A person doesn't care about himself, you can't criticize him. That's why the rabbis didn't react. Not that they wouldn't have reacted tomorrow. You know, then it calms down. They start trying to figure out, this we discussed, how do you build up a feeling that a person should care about himself. But in order to give criticism to a person that's self-hating, the first thing you have to do is, it's a long process, it's a process, you have to build him up that he should start caring about himself. Once he cares about himself, they say, what are you doing with your wife? You're throwing your wife and children away. But how if the person is that self-destructive? If you can then have to begin a long process to figure out how to make a person feel good about himself. But on the spot to do anything, it'll only make it worse. So I'm explaining now the Marsha's question was, how come the rabbis didn't react? They can't. You can't react. You can't criticize a person that's self-destructive, because all criticism is you have to tell him you're hurting yourself. He doesn't care about hurting himself. He's willing to hurt himself more as long as to hurt somebody else. He's so alienated from himself. The only way you can criticize that person is by first building him up to the fact that he cares about himself and he won't be self-destructive. Just take into the Marsha's question. So far we have two things we pulled out in the Talmud. Number one, the Talmud here is giving us a definition of sinas chinam, that a person is alienated from himself, that he will inflict pain on somebody else, even if it will mean greater pain on himself. That's how alienated he is from himself. And that the law of tochacha is only to let a person, tell a person he's harming himself. But a person who's self-destructive doesn't care about harming himself. And since he doesn't care about harming himself, there's no way to criticize. So it's another very important insight to see the person who's seeing my scheme, the way we're explaining, there's no short fix of criticism. No matter how light you say and anything else, because the criticism means you have to make him feel good about himself, that it'll then be his decision not to do anything that will hurt him. But if he's self-destructive, so it's going to take time to do that. I would say we're not obligated to do that, but that's not, at that night, there's nothing the rabbis could do. And therefore, it's not likely, if the Talmud doesn't hold the rabbis responsible here. Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, they were two individuals. The real culprits would be the rabbis, one would think. Aside from Marsha's question, how come the rabbis didn't do it? But they should be, at the end of the day, the culprits. They're not culprits because you can't do anything. It would have only escalated the war. It would have made it much harder to fix it. There's no obligation to criticize somebody who, when you criticize, it's going to be worse. And a self-destructive person you can't criticize. But now we understand. I'll take all questions. Ashrei Odom. Introduction to this is Ashrei Odom Lefatekom. And what is it? They didn't see the consequence. They didn't realize what Bar Kamsa was going to do. They didn't realize that. What's that mean? So the premise of the question, when they asked the question, was, of course they know. Ezu Chacham Aroas and Noah. They couldn't figure out that there's going to be terrible. The other two stories are going to be terrible consequences. Self-destructive behavior means, what does it mean? I don't care about the consequences. That's what, there's two, Ein Aroas Hanola, according to Rashi, doesn't mean he doesn't see the future. He doesn't take that into account because he's self-destructive. He doesn't care what's going to happen. Of course they knew. A self-destructive person, we don't exercise, we overeat, we smoke. Does that mean because we really don't know what the consequences are? When you get into a self-destructive mode, it means you don't care about the consequences. That's the way Rashi is reading this Gemara. That's why he's reading the whole introduction to this Gemara is Ashrei Odom Mefache Tomid, and that you always are worried about consequences. Not that we're not intelligent, they didn't see the consequences. They saw the consequences. They didn't care about the consequences. Who doesn't care about consequences? You know anybody who smokes? Do you know anybody who overeats? Do you know anybody who doesn't exercise? That, to that extent means we're self-destructive. We know. The statistics tell us. I mean, there was a time in medicine, science didn't know how dangerous smoking was. Today everybody knows, and they're fairly immediate. But so what? When I'm self-destructive, that's probably one of our biggest problems. We're alienated from ourselves. The whole foundation of everything we're saying is the problem here is self-destructive behavior. I don't care about consequences. I'm alienated from myself. Therefore, I don't care how much I hurt you. Even if I hurt myself more, as long as I hurt you, it's okay. Can't criticize. And not only that, it means I don't look at consequences. Not that I don't see them. I see them, but they're irrelevant to me because I don't care what's going to happen to me. What happened to the host over here? Why is the host off to the host? That is an unbelievable question. The host, he's the culprit here. He did all this. He's the other question, Kamsa was it that he didn't get invited to a simcha? What do you want? He wasn't even at the party. We're holding him responsible. A very interesting Gemara. The Gemara says in Yuma, Koha Barachem al-Achsar, whoever has compassion on a cruel person, so eventually he will be Achsar al-Rachma. And the Talmud says that means the following. Shol HaMelech had this tremendous compassion for Agag, the king of Amalek. He couldn't kill him. He couldn't kill him. And at the end of the day, Shol HaMelech wiped out the city of Nov Ir Kohanim. Talmud says because somebody who's cruel, who has compassion on a cruel person, on Agag, eventually will be cruel to a person you should have compassion, the Kohanim. What's one thing to do with the other? We saw it happen one time. Talmud's telling us a rule. I guess a lot of people just translate. Well, he just doesn't have a value system. Talmud's not saying that. Talmud's saying if you do this, you will do that. Not you might do that. Man has compassion. How are we so sure that someone who's compassionate on somebody cruel will definitely be cruel to somebody who's compassionate? It doesn't seem to make any sense. The Talmud is telling us like this. It's an enormous insight into psychological insight. The people that what's the word? I have compassion on someone. What generates my feeling of compassion? The word in Hebrew is merachim. The word in Aramaic means somebody I love. It means I feel connected to someone. The reason I have special feelings for someone is because I feel connected to them. That's what generates my feeling of compassion, is because I feel connected. Even kindness, like almost one of a kind. I feel connected, and therefore I'm compassionate on them. Agag is a cruel person or a compassionate person? Agag, cruel. He's cruel. If I'm compassionate with somebody that's cruel, what does that say about me?
Connected to him.
What does that say about me? I'm cruel. And therefore, so Shul had a streak of cruelty. That's what it's saying. And therefore, it was just waiting to come out. Called him Merachem al Achsar, which so will be an Achsar al Rachel, because the sense the people you connect to, the people you're close to, that's who you are. And therefore, if you can feel an identification with a cruel person, that means you're cruel. And therefore, so that's what the Talmud is saying. For sure, that's what the words of the Talmud are. If I'm cruel, and if I'm compassionate to somebody that's cruel, that means I feel a oneness and likeness with him. Therefore, deep down, I have cruelty within me. That's why I identify with him. And eventually, what will happen? If I'm cruel inside, that cruelty will come out. And that's what it's saying by King Shaul. And therefore, eventually, he wiped out the city of Nov Ir Kohanim. X is a name doesn't have a name. His best friend is Kamsa, and his enemy is Barka. What does Kamsa mean? If we do it in modern literature, the Talmud certainly requires that.
Stingy.
Miserly.
Kamsa means this, tight-fisted. What does tight-fisted mean? Scrooge is tight-fisted. That's because he can't afford to give. The only person who has to close his fist is the person who has ducats in his fist, right? If you don't have any money, I can be open. My hands are open to everybody. Just got nothing in the hand. When you say somebody is tight-fisted, that means he has something in his hand that he's not releasing from his hand. A kamsa is not somebody who doesn't have money. It's somebody who doesn't give money. A miser is someone who can afford but doesn't spend. In fact, my experience is somewhat limited, but misers, they don't give me money. A real miserly person doesn't, what else does he do? He doesn't spend on himself either. And one of the richest men, I think, one of the richest Jews in Holland many years ago, they buried him in a, he didn't give any stuff, so they refused to bury him. It was huge. He would go, and, I don't know, what's the krone over there, the currency, whatever it was, a multi-millionaire. This was years ago. And he would go every day to the bakery. No, I want the day-old bread. I think in Europe they can actually buy day-old. When I grew up, it was like that in the United States too. But you can buy day-old. They do it here now. You go in the bakery, day-old bread is cheaper. He would insist on day-old bread. A miser doesn't feel himself. He's alienated from himself too. A miser doesn't feel himself worthy of spending money on himself. Miser is not he doesn't spend on somebody else. A miser is someone who doesn't spend on himself too. Miser is an illness. It's that I don't feel worthy. I can't spend on myself. If his best friend is kamsa, what does that say about X? He's the same thing. We just don't know him, but now we can identify him from the fact that his best friend is kamsa. Who's his enemy? Bar kamsa. The Maharsha here wants to mean the son of kamsa. Maybe that may also be true. But when I think about the word bar, what does the word bar mean?
In the category of.
It means?
In the category of.
No. Bar means?
External.
Excuse me?
External.
Outside. Chevas Barov Ofe Shemayim. Outside. By the way, it's interesting. I didn't say it Shabbos, so it's sold. Bar mitzvah didn't make any sense to me. Should we call that's an Aramaic word, son. What's wrong with the Hebrew word bar mitzvah? How come we adopted the Aramaic word? What kind of, generally, we speak Hebrew. So for hundreds of years, Jews talk about bar mitzvahs. Does anybody hear of a ben mitzvah? I think maybe in modern Hebrew they're starting to use the word ben mitzvah. But surely everybody had a bar mitzvah. What's bar mitzvah? It should be ben mitzvah. Use the Hebrew word. I have to remember our ethnic, we came from Iraq, is that what we're trying to remind ourselves? Or have our Aramean descent? Bar mitzvah means the rabbis chose the word for son, not the Hebrew word ben, but the word bar. Bar means, in Aramaic, it means son, and Hebrew means what? Outside. It's when you become a bar mitzvah, the message is you, the parent, have to look at your child no longer as an extension of you, but something outside of you. That's really the rite of passage. Is until now a child's like an appendage of mine. When he becomes bar mitzvah, means the parents have to start looking at him. He has a mind of his own. He's outside of me. That's what the word bar. So I think the word kamsa and bar kamsa here is. Kamsa means he's the miser. Bar kamsa means he's the antithesis of being a miser. How do I know he's the antithesis of being a miser?
He offered to pay.
He's offering to pay for the whole party. Right? Bar kamsa is a miser. I mean, he's the opposite of the miser. What happens eventually? What happens eventually? He goes to the emperor. The Jews are rebelling, and finally he kills the eye. He puts a blemish, and the city of Jerusalem is destroyed. The Talmud record that he made a deal with the city, with the emperor. Okay, you can destroy the city of Jerusalem, but not my family, not my cousins, like Rochav Azam. Okay, we'll do that, but I'm giving you this information. The Jews, that should have been part and parcel of the deal. That means who got killed in Yerushalayim? Bar Kamsa's family too. Hear what happened? How insidious Sinas Chinam was. From this story, his hatred made him hate himself. At the end of the day, he became a Kamsa too. He became self-destructive. A man who yesterday or last month was willing to, for his own honor, spend huge amounts of money to preserve his sense of well-being and to prevent himself from shame. At the end of the day, what does he do? He goes ahead and has a city destroyed, and he doesn't care about his own family either. That's also self-destructive. When you get into Sinas Chinam, so at the end of the day, Bar Kamsa also got Sinas Chinam. So it's really on Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, but they're both actually. Kamsa is the way of defining the host. And therefore the host was a miser, and therefore the host was alienated from himself, and therefore he said, Mich Yahu, God, he talked about himself as in the third person. Bar Kamsa liked himself originally, and he would spend huge amounts of money to save his embarrassment. At the end of the day, there's no amount of, he doesn't care what he does to the Jewish community, nor what he does to himself. That's the storyline. Therefore, our question was, why is the host is being said? Kamsa is really defining the host. If your best friend is Kamsa, then you are self-destructive, self-hating person too. You can't spend even on yourself. And Bar Kamsa start off as being the opposite of that. And by the way, that's why it would be an enemy. Self-hating people can't stand people who feel good about themselves. And at the end of the day, he also becomes Kamsa. He also becomes self-destructive. How do I give us the simple translation of the story? Just taking all the questions. So there, our question is, Talmud says Sinas Chinam. Here it says something else. No, this is a story of Sinas Chinam. And the Talmud says two other stories here, and it begins with Asher. People are afraid, they don't look at consequences. What does that have to do with Sinas Chinam? It's telling us we're not looking at consequences, meaning you're not concerned with consequences. You're self-destructive. You don't care about the consequences. That's the ultimate of self-destruction. Being alienated for yourself is the ultimate sense. I don't have to look at consequences. It doesn't mean they didn't know what they are, like when we smoke. We know what they are, but we don't care. In fact, when you're really alienated for yourself and you don't feel good about yourself, self-destructive behavior is something you want to accelerate. You're in pain. You're in pain. Alienation of yourself is painful. So if you can accelerate that, and probably self-destruction is something that is a way of getting out of my pain and consciousness of my non-existence, and therefore the self-destructive behavior is not only I don't care about it, I'm looking forward to it because it's going to get me out of my misery sooner. It's like, what they call it, suicide by cops. I don't have the courage to kill myself, but I'll pull out a water gun, black water gun on the cops at night, and they'll kill me. That's a whole psychological profile of suicide by a cop. To some extent, self-destructive behavior is the same thing. I'm not going to kill me. I can't kill myself, but I'll eat myself to death. I won't exercise. And by the way, people do exactly the same thing tomorrow. They look like they've lost control over their business or their wealth. Self-destructive. We all know. They throw good money after bad money. That's not a mistake. All of us look at the shit. What are you doing? He knows what he's doing. He's so disappointed in himself that he feels he's lost his wealth, that he's just accelerating his destruction. How do we deal with this problem? How do we deal with the problem? Therefore, before we get to that, let's just discuss for a couple minutes. We're surrounded. Why do Jews have so much of this? And we just can't get along. I know it's heartbreaking what's going on now. I don't even remember in modern times, last 50, 60 years, anything like this. Every day in the newspaper, there's wars against Jews. Wars. I mean, anything, both sides are overreacting, and whatever harm they can do. They're spending 4.1 billion shekel in order to increase the light rail from HaRav to Ein Kerem. They say today 4.1 billion. That means it's going to cost how much? Twice that, probably. Would that not take care of 150,000 families of subsidies? They're only talking about now, the whole subsidy here is about $300 million a year. You know, the whole fight that they're trying to reduce, I think it's 1.2 billion, whatever, in shekel, $400 million a year. And all this, I don't believe it should be a welfare state. I'm saying if you're talking about money, but God forbid, we're not only talking about money here, we're not talking about principle, we want people to work. I mean, so what do they do? What are they throwing out 8 billion shekel? And they can take care of many, many poor people. All the prices are rising, the subsidies are going out, or the Nitzoli Shoah have really living substandard, the social, everything is going down. Is it that important when you have a life? I mean, if you're really talking about, there's a huge war going on over there. Really a huge war. But that comes, the Jews have that feeling. We all know it's the death and the anathema in every community. The death knows that the sinas chinam. I think why Jews have such a sense of sinas chinam is because we have so much potential to achieve. When a person doesn't feel that he's achieving, he actually becomes alienated from himself. And we'll see with our children. The children have more potential. Are going to be happier with themselves, and the children have less potential. If you don't know the answer to that is because you're youngsters. But I'm telling you that the children that have more potential are the harder to bring up, the more they can, because they can get along and ace every course. They can be outstanding students, but they know they're using only 50% of their potential. They don't feel good inside about themselves. The more potential a person knows, the more that he doesn't fulfill the potential, the pain and the emptiness that he feels is so painful that he has to have the only one solution. He has to self-destruct. He feels alienated. I have so much me that I'm not touching. And the greater a person's potential is, the greater. So probably the reason it's a particularly Jewish malaise is because we have an enormous, enormous potential. And therefore we're prone to not fulfilling our potential. It makes it very easy. You're going around half depressed. By the way, this I'm sure everybody knows. 48% in the United States of people in in-house facilities for depression are Jews. You know that? 48%. We're what, 3% of the population? The broadest definition of a Jew. 3% of the population, 15, 16 times the amount. And I'm convinced well, first of all, you realize that these private, I'm not talking about state hospitals, I'm talking about private facilities. You know how they work. The good news is that Jews have money. So you don't have money, you don't get into it. Those, you go to a private facility, nobody should know about that. It's usually about $160,000 to $170,000 first year. Second year drops to about $144,000, but the first year there's more. And the good news is the child always has a refuah shleima the day the insurance runs out. They warrant he's fine. And as soon as the medical insurance the parents were, they dismiss them because they've actually been cured now. But the reason for that is because we have such an enormous feeling of capability and potential. And you look around, what the Jews have accomplished is so mind-boggling. The last 45, 55 years coming out of Auschwitz, ashes, mentally, physically destroyed human beings. In 60 years creates a state that has a world-class economy, world-class technology. It's incredible. Of course, we had the support of 200 million neighbors that gave us a lot of emotional support at the same time. But even with that, it's an incredible. It's the third world-class army. It is unbelievable. So we know what our potential is, and we also have tremendous spiritual potential. When we don't use our potential, the person gets depressed. Because I can be like everybody else. But I know I have so much more. How am I going to feel about myself when I'm doing as well as everybody else in the class, or as well as, but I know I have so much more in me. And a Jew knows that, and spiritually, other abilities God gave us, and therefore, depression is very close. And you get to the point that we don't like ourselves. If I don't like myself, I'm not going to like you. You have to I'll end with this. How do you deal with this problem? Rabbi Akiva says, what's the cloud blood of the Torah? You have to You have to love yourself. Hafta l'reacha, you love your friend like yourself. That's the a priori axiom of the Torah. The Medrash Rabbah in Perek Hey in Gracious brings the Ben Azai his student asked him a question. How about if you don't like yourself? Let's put this in context. 2,000 years ago, the Medrash is 2,000 years old. They've been writing for 2,000 years. Now, what were other cultures thinking about 2,000 years ago?
Gladiators.
What's the best way to swing from a tree? What's the best part of the human being to eat? Our ancestors were studying how do you love somebody if you don't love yourself. We have it in writing for 2,000 years. You understand the level of sophistication? We have a lot of pride that we have a tremendous tradition of thinking and sophistication and dealing with real issues. So that was Ben Azai's question to Rabbi Akiva. What about if you don't like yourself? And I'm saying that we have a huge propensity to not liking ourselves. We're still in goals. It's 2,000 years because of Sinas Chino. And I'm saying Sinas Chino means deep down, who don't you like? I don't like yourself. And actually, I'm a guy. I'm the Haftarah. Come on. I don't like me, and I don't like you. So that we don't have an answer on Rabbi Akiva. Some other time you'll want me back. I'll go through that whole membership. Each one is a whole new insight how to get to like yourself. But let me tell you what I think the answer from Rabbi Akiva is. The Rambam tells us at the end of Hilchos Megillah, there's no greater sense of joy in the world. There's no greater feeling of happiness in the world than to help somebody who's Rachmanis and Almana, somebody who's devastated, who's poor, or suffered a tragedy. There's no greater sense of pleasure in the world than to help out somebody else. That's the greatest sense of simcha. And he brings a pasuk, Einlach simcha l'fo'eres. There's no more magnificent, majestic sense of joy, of happiness, than helping somebody needs help. For Rabbi Akiva, I think the answer to Ben Azai's question is go ahead and do acts of friendliness and kindness to somebody, and then you'll start liking yourself. If you have a feeling you don't like yourself, Yochanan is the answer to that. The answer is do the action, and that if you go ahead and help somebody who's emotionally devastated or seriously financial problems, and you help them, you will start liking yourself. This Medrash doesn't have an answer. So either we don't know what the answer, or it means that Ben Azai didn't really understand what his Rebbe was saying. Ben Azai has his own answer, Yaakov has his own answer. That's a whole different discussion. Here there is no answer. What I think the pshat has to be based on that Rambam is if you don't like yourself and you help out somebody, that will make you like yourself. When you do things that are meaningful, and you feel you're contributing to the welfare of others in a significant way, there's no greater feeling of simcha. You want to be happy with yourself, help out somebody else. So we have 2,000 years, we're not getting along. I'm saying not getting along, it's not about you. It's not about you, it's about me. Which, by the way, it's very important to know that when a person strikes out against you, it's usually not about you. It's about him. So it doesn't make sense for me to retaliate. He's in pain, and I'm just somebody's in pain, when frustrated, going to punch the wall. It would make sense if the wall strike back at the person. It makes sense. It's not about the wall, it's just his own sense of pain. So if we understand that, this definition of sinas chino, probably the first thing is to realize it doesn't make sense to strike back at him because it wasn't about you. I have many places in halacha that I can prove from the halacha that that's true. It's not about you, it's about him. The second thing is, if we want to extricate ourselves from that pain, let's start going and helpful to people, think of things that people need, and to really get involved in a serious use a lot of my physical effort, my physical resources, my emotional resources, my financial resources to help people that are really devastated and destitute, guarantee I'll be a happy person. Once I'm a happy person, you like yourself, you're going to like everybody else. What's that expression, the whole world loves a lover? Because he loves everybody. When you're alone, you love everybody. You can't stand yourself. So just start over here. This is not a fight between the HaRav and the left. We don't like ourselves. They don't like themselves. We just have to be someone to strike out, and they have to be someone. Before we start striking back, let's start fixing ourselves. The Torah tells us, let's improve ourselves of chesed, improve ourselves of really helping people. And by the way, they're also people to be helped. They're also people to be helped. And if we help them, then there's a feeling that we have no reason to attack them. But usually, as Shlomo says, the way you treat somebody else, they're going to treat you back the same way. And I'll end with a story that I wouldn't have been capable of doing, but it's Yochanan, me in yeshiva. We've been learning about 5 years in Kol and Amir. He's learns part-time, fairly learned seriously in Kol. His father's comfortable, very comfortable. He set him up in business here. He bought a number of houses, real estate management. In the afternoon, he learns in the morning, he learns at night. He supports himself. He's sitting on a bus. I'm sure we've all had similar. A man sits down next to a man in his 80s. You parasite! You parasite! Come here, you suck out the money from the system, you didn't fight in any wars. That would have been me. I would say, you know, why are you jumping to conclusions? I have done the business here. No. So he says, I love you. Thank you so much for providing the safety and security. I wasn't here, my family wasn't here. I'm telling you a true story. I really appreciate the way you went to war and you protected me. A couple blocks later, gets off. He's an older man. He has bags. He carries his bags to his apartment. Puts him in the apartment. Says goodbye to him. The man turns around and gives him a hug and a kiss. Gave him a hug and a kiss. Any story that I know I wouldn't have been capable of doing, I think is worthwhile telling over. If you treat somebody with respect, Shlomo says that's the way he's going to treat you. Especially when our problems are our own frustrations with ourselves. That's the truth. It's our own. They may be the same, which we should also realize that means they're not really directed against us. We're just you had a bad day at the office and you come home and you start screaming at your wife. She caused it a problem. You start screaming at the kids because you lost the sale. And nothing to do with that, but you're frustrated, so you take out your frustration on who's, they're very frustrated too. So, A, we should take that a little less. It's B, let us start doing things that are right, that will improve our own feelings of self-esteem, feelings of feeling good about ourselves. And one we know, we use the Rambam, go ahead and use our resources, time, effort to help people that really need help. We'll start feeling good about ourselves. And the Lashon Haba will be the Yerushalayim Hallelujah. You got a question?
The rabbis who didn't get HaRav because they knew that he wouldn't listen, but what about the other person who's feeling unsupported and uncared about? Can they give it
I don't know that they didn't walk over to that person afterwards and tell them.
No, because obviously he's feeling that nobody cares about him.
I'm saying I don't know that he was satisfied with that answer, or maybe he was so upset with the rabbi, and he didn't understand, for sure, he did not understand that this person didn't care about himself after that offer, that anything they would have said could have made it worse.
To him.
Yeah, well,
My
the worse
question
then.
is, why not give support to the guests?
I'm sure in the morning they would start, when a person is hurting, an injury, you need a little time that he gets out of his rage to be able to, like, when a person's enraged and devastated, you may have to give him a little time till you explain to him that's that man's problem, etc. But all I'm saying, there's nothing you can do on the spot. Yeah, you have to talk to him afterwards, and likely he didn't give them a chance for that.
He ran off to Rome the next morning.
Yeah, to take his vengeance.
Thank you very much. I have some closing remarks. Although I really feel I have the right to be up here. I want you to know, first of all, welcome everybody, if it's anybody's first time here. The very first Orthodox Jew that I ever met was Yochanan. Wow. And I actually, it was like hook, line, and sinker with the truth, because I kind of was ready. I did a lot of soul searching, 7 years in other religions, and he made it relevant. I mean, as you saw tonight, we take home the message. It's not just to dissect. Oh, I'll tell you something else. So I brought up Reform and Reform Judaism. And we went on trips to New York, and we saw these museums. Museums have old phylacteries and Torah scrolls and tzitzis under glass. It was part of like, I actually thought Judaism was dead. Like I just thought it was dead. Like that's what you put in a museum. But I'll tell you, when I sat with Rabbi Zweig on a Tuesday night, and he had a Gemara open, and I'm thinking like, that's the same thing that was under the glass, and it's alive and it's relevant. I said, and I remember he put his arm around me and said, "You want to learn?" I'm like, "Sign me up. I'm ready." This is some good stuff. Anyway, it changed my life. I spent almost 2 years, and then I came to Israel and never came back. And anyway, so we do look forward to having Yochanan Zweig come again. For the information, you can look up on Google, Talmudic University, right? You look on Google, Talmudic University of Florida, you'll find a lot of the shiurim, okay? They're worthwhile. And also here, there's some papers going around with our website, right? The Emic Learning Center, we have programs all week long, Shabbos, and please sign up for our newsletter, and I bet you'll enjoy it as much as I do.
You guys are getting out there, so it's about time.
Baby's fluffing at night, so that's it. Once you get a system going. If I had known about this in advance, I would have called my brother to come and see what he
Last week.
With you or do you have your car keys with you or are they at home?
car keys are at home, but I gave you a key so you can I think it's hysterical. No. Do you want to switch that off?
I would probably mess it up. I don't know what to do.